Betrayal doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in moments so small you almost convince yourself they don't matter. But they add up. It was a Sunday when I carried over another casserole. Sam's favorite chicken and mushroom, baked with extra cheese. I set it on the counter, already reaching for plates. Karen's voice cut in sharp as a blade. "Oh, Margaret, you don't need to bother. We ordered Thai tonight." I froze. "Takeout? On Sunday?" "Yes." She smiled faintly. "The kids prefer it. Less old-fashioned." I glanced at Sam, expecting him to defend me, to say at least one word in my favor. He just shrugged, poured himself a glass of wine, and let the silence stand. So I carried the dish back to my car, casserole still steaming, my hands shaking too much to drive for several minutes. A week later, I came by to weed the garden. It had always been my sanctuary. Rows of roses I planted when Sam was 5, but the shed was locked. On the porch sat a cardboard box with my tools inside. A note lay neatly on top, in Karen's handwriting. "We're reorganizing. Thanks for understanding." Understanding. The word mocked me. That night I called Sam. Why would she move my tools out? His sigh came heavy through the line. "Mom, she's just trying to keep things tidy. Don't take it personally." "Not personal?" My voice cracked. "That garden is mine, Sam. I planted those roses when you were still in diapers." He stayed quiet too long, then said softly, "Mom, maybe it's time to let us handle things our way." Our way. The words stuck like a thorn. Then came the babysitting. I'd offered to keep Emma and Jake for the weekend, bake cookies, read them bedtime stories. They loved coming to my place. But Karen shook her head politely, her tone sugar-sweet. "They already have playdates. Maybe next time." Next time never came. I told myself families bend, not break. That patience would fix it. But with every rejection, I felt myself shrinking, a shadow on the edge of my own life. The night of my 70th birthday sealed it. I had wrapped the pearl necklace in velvet, ready to pass it on. Something to remind Karen that this family had history, roots deeper than her new paint colors and curated photos. But when I arrived, she leaned close, perfume sharp, and whispered, "You don't need jewelry at your age." Sam laughed nervously, steered the conversation elsewhere, and I slid the velvet box back into my purse. That night, as candles flickered and glasses clinked, I smiled on cue and kept silent. But inside, something hardened. I realized I was no longer invisible by accident. I was being erased on purpose. The weeks after that birthday dinner felt colder than any winter. Phone calls went unanswered. Texts returned, with one-word replies. When I dropped by unannounced, I was met with polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. One afternoon I stood on the porch with a tin of cookies Emma had once begged me to bake. Through the window I saw them laughing at the table, plates already full from takeout. No one opened the door. Later Sam called. "Mom, you really should let us know before coming over. Since when do I need an invitation to my own home?" I asked quietly. A pause. Then, "Things are different now." Different. The word stung worse than any insult. The signs piled up. A holiday invitation that never came. A family photo posted online where I was cropped out. Emma's school play. I found out about it from a neighbor. I told myself it was oversight. Mistakes. But deep down, I knew better. The final blow came that November afternoon. I walked up the steps with 2 boxes in my arms. Old photos, Sam's baby blanket, cards he'd drawn in crayon, things I thought might remind them who I was, where this family came from. Karen met me at the door. Her arms crossed, her smile rehearsed. "You're not allowed in the house until you apologize." I blinked at her. Apologize? For what? You know, she said smoothly. Until then, you stay out. Behind her, Sam stood silent, his eyes fixed on the floorboards. Sam? My voice cracked. Are you really going to let her do this? His jaw tightened. Just do what she asks, Mom. Oh, do what she asks. My laugh came bitter, sharp. 40. 2 years in this house. And now I need permission to cross my own porch? Karen's voice was cold steel. Exactly. Family means knowing your place. I felt the boxes shift in my arms. Inside were fragments of my life. Our life. And here I was, treated like a stranger with no claim. Silence pressed heavy. Even the wind seemed to wait for my answer. Finally, I swallowed the lump in my throat. Very well. I turned, my steps slow, each one echoing like nails in a coffin. Behind me, the door clicked shut. Not slammed, just shut. Quiet. Final. At the end of the driveway, I set the boxes down, breath clouding in the November air. My arms trembled, not from weakness but from something sharper. They thought they had locked me out. They had no idea what door they had just opened. You're not allowed in the house until you apologize. Her words still rang in my ears. But that day, I didn't leave right away. I shifted the boxes against my hip and met her eyes. Apologize for what, Karen? For existing? For raising the son who pays this mortgage? Her lips twitched into something smug. For your attitude. For making everything harder than it has to be. My attitude? I scoffed. I worked double shifts to put food on this table. I patched that roof in the middle of a storm. What exactly am I guilty of being here too long? Karen stepped closer, her perfume sharp. You don't respect boundaries. This is our home now. You don't make the rules here anymore. I turned to Sam. And you? Do you agree with her? He shifted uncomfortably, eyes glued to the floor. Mom, please, just say you're sorry. It'll make things easier. Easier? My voice cracked. For whom? For her? Karen's tone sharpened. For everyone. You bring tension into this house every time you step foot inside. The children feel it. Sam feels it. I feel it. Until you admit you're wrong, you don't belong here. I let out a bitter laugh. Don't belong? This house was mine before you ever set foot in it. Every nail, every floorboard, every memory mine. Her smile hardened. Not anymore. Times change. Families change. Families? I whispered. Do families lock their mothers on the porch like beggars? Sam finally looked up, his eyes pained but resolute. Mom, please, just apologize. I felt my chest tighten, my grip on the boxes shaking. Inside were memories of his childhood. His first drawing, his first baseball glove, the birthday cards he made with crayons. Proof that I had been there. Every step of his life. And now, he stood there, asking me to beg. No, I said softly. Karen tilted her head. Then you can leave. Our silence stretched, broken only by the creak of the porch beneath my feet. I set the boxes down, straightened my back, and looked at both of them. One day, you'll regret this moment. And when you do, remember I warned you. Their faces stayed blank, unmoved. So I picked up the boxes again and stepped off the porch. The door clicked shut behind me, quiet as a knife sliding into its sheath. At the end of the driveway, I stopped, the November wind biting at my face. My arms trembled under the weight of the boxes, but my voice, when it came, was steady. They think they've shut me out. I whispered to the night, but they've just handed me the only key that matters. The first drops of rain began to fall as I walked down the driveway, the cardboard edges of the boxes softening under the drizzle. My shoes splashed against the pavement, each step sounding final, like a gavel, striking again and again. Behind me, the porch light flicked off. They didn't even wait until I was gone. The street was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. I stopped under the old maple tree by the curb, the one Sam used to climb when he was 7. I remembered his laughter echoing through the yard, his small hands reaching for mine when he slipped and scraped his knee. And now? That same boy had turned his face away. Let his wife speak for him. Let her lock me out of my own history. I set the boxes down on the wet sidewalk, my arms aching. The top one sagged, water creeping into the seams. I pressed a hand against it, whispering, "Not yet. You've survived worse." A car passed slowly, headlights washing over me. For a second, I wondered what the driver saw: a tired old woman with boxes at her feet, caught in the rain, abandoned at the edge of a glowing house. Did they pity me? Did they think I was homeless? Maybe I was. The porch door opened briefly, spilling light into the night. Karen's silhouette appeared, sharp and unyielding. "Go home, Margaret," she called out, voice slicing through the rain. "We don't need this drama." I turned my head just enough for her to see my face. This was my home. Then I bent down, lifted the boxes again, and kept walking. The door closed behind me with a soft thud. That was the last sound I heard from the house. By the time I reached the end of the block, my dress clung to my skin, heavy with rain. But there was something harder than water coursing through me now. Resolve. I stopped under the flickering street lamp, chest heaving, arms trembling, and looked back one last time. The house loomed in the distance, dark windows, staring like blind eyes. I whispered to myself, "Let them have their silence. Mine will be louder." Oh, lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the soaked boxes I clutched like armor. I wasn't just carrying memories anymore. I was carrying proof. Proof of a life they couldn't erase, no matter how hard they tried. I turned away from the house and stepped into the storm. And in that storm, something inside me shifted. I wasn't leaving defeated. I was leaving armed. The storm followed me home, slapping against the windows of the small apartment I had rented after my husband died. Rainwater dripped from my coat as I pushed the door shut behind me. The echo of that slammed porch door still lodged deep in my chest. I carried the boxes to the kitchen table, water seeping through the seams, dripping onto the old linoleum floor that curled at the edges. My hands trembled as I peeled back the soggy cardboard. What spilled out onto the table wasn't just paper and cloth. It was my life, unraveling under the weight of water. Sam's crayon drawings, their colors faded, but still bold enough to remind me of the little boy who once clutched my hand. Yellowed birthday cards written in uneven letters. The veil from my wedding day, edges frayed but soft under my fingertips. I laid each item flat, careful, almost reverent, like wounded soldiers returning from battle. They carried scars, but they were still mine. At the bottom of the box, beneath a stack of old tax returns, something caught my eye. A manila envelope, its flap curling with age. The ink on the label nearly faded into nothing, but the handwriting, I knew it instantly. My husband's. My throat tightened. I hadn't seen his writing in years, and here it was, suddenly alive again under my fingertips. With hands that shook harder now, I opened it. Inside were documents, mortgage papers, tax statements, and the deed to the house. The paper smelled faintly of dust and time, the corners stiff and yellowing. My eyes scanned the lines until they landed on the bold black print of a single name. Not Karen's, not Sam's, mine. The house was still legally mine. I sank into a chair, staring at the papers as rain hammered harder against the glass. For years, I had allowed them to treat me like a guest. let their words cut into me until I believed I was powerless. A relic they tolerated out of pity. I thought I had been living on their mercy. But here, in my hands, was proof that every wall, every nail, every inch of that house still belonged to me. A bitter laugh escaped, sharp in the silence. They had shut me out of a home that was never theirs to claim. I closed my eyes, and in the rhythm of the storm, I saw his face, my husband, steady and kind, the day he signed those papers. "It's for you, Maggie," he had said. "No matter what happens, this house will always be yours." The sound of his voice filled the room, as if he were sitting across from me again, strong enough to steady me after all these years. I ran a finger over the deed, the ink cool and solid under my touch. The weight in my chest shifted no longer despair, but something harder, sharper. Resolve. I whispered into the empty kitchen. If they don't want me in that house, then they won't have it either. The words tasted strange, bitter, and bold. But as they left my mouth, I felt something rise in me I thought had died long ago. Power. I looked around the room at the damp boxes, at the pieces of a life I had carried out into the rain, and I knew then I didn't need to beg for entry. I had held the key all along, and tomorrow I would use it. I sat there for a long time, staring at the deed spread across the table. The storm outside had softened into a steady drizzle, each drop tapping the glass, like a reminder that time was moving forward, whether I was ready or not. For years, I had carried myself like a guest in my own life. Every insult, every dismissal, I had absorbed quietly. I convinced myself that silence was dignity, that endurance was strength. But tonight, drenched and humiliated on the porch of my own home, I finally saw it for what it was. Erasure. Karen's voice replayed in my head, sharp and commanding. "This is our home now. You don't belong here." And Sam, my boy, my only son, his eyes downcast, whispering, "Just apologize, Mom." Ha! Apologize? For what? For keeping the lights on when his father's paycheck wasn't enough? For sitting in waiting rooms through every fever, every broken bone? For patching jeans at midnight so he wouldn't stand out at school? The questions piled up like stones, each one heavier than the last. My chest ached, but my breathing grew steadier. I rose from the chair, the deed clutched tightly in my hand, and crossed the small room to the cedar chest in the corner. I had avoided opening it for years. It felt like disturbing a grave. But tonight, I pulled it open. Inside lay relics of a life I had built with my own hands. My husband's tool belt, stiff with age and use. The quilt I had sewn from Sam's baby clothes, each patch a story stitched in thread. And at the bottom, wrapped in a handkerchief, the brass key to the house. Heavy, worn smooth at the edges, familiar as my own heartbeat. I held it in my palm, cold metal pressing into my skin, reminding me that doors only matter if the key fits. That house was never Karen's to grant or deny me. It had been mine from the beginning. The humiliation of that afternoon shifted inside me. It no longer burned like shame. It sharpened into clarity. They had drawn a line, dared me to cross it. And for the first time, I realized I didn't have to. I could erase the line entirely. The thought sprouted like a seed and rooted itself deep. I could sell it, end their illusion of power in a single decisive stroke. I pictured Karen's face when she discovered the truth, the shock, the fury, the way her smug confidence would crumble into dust. I imagined Sam, finally remembering who had kept that roof over his head all those years. Maybe then, he would see me again, not as an inconvenience, not as a burden, but as the woman who carried him through every storm. I walked back to the table, sliding the deed carefully into its envelope. My decision was already made. Tomorrow, I would call a realtor. Tomorrow, I would end their reign over my silence. I set the envelope on the table and placed the brass key beside it. The dim light caught its surface, dull but steady, like a flame that refused to go out. For the first time in years, I felt no fear, no hesitation, no need to ask permission, only resolve. The storm outside had become a whisper, the last drops sliding down the glass. In the quiet that followed, I sat in the kitchen, my hands folded, the deed and the key lying between them like weapons waiting to be used. And for the first time, I wasn't the woman left out in the rain. I was the one holding the storm. Morning came gray, the kind of light that seeps through curtains like a warning. I hadn't slept. The deed sat on the table all night, the brass key beside it. My tea had gone cold hours ago. I stared at the envelope, steady now, no trembling in my hands. This wasn't just paper. This was proof. This was power. I picked up the phone. The number to the realtor was scribbled on the back of an old receipt. My finger hovered over the digits for a moment before pressing them, one by one. It rang twice. Good morning. This is Davis Realty. My name is Margaret Williams, I said, my voice calm, clipped. I want to sell my house. A pause. Then polite confusion. Wonderful. We can schedule a consultation this week. Today. I cut in. The deed is in my name. It's ready. Silence. Then a shift in tone. More serious. If you have the paperwork, we can move quickly. May I come by this afternoon? Yes. I hung up. My hand didn't shake. I moved to the cedar chest again. The quilt. The tool belt. The photos. They were no longer just relics. They were witnesses. Proof that the house had been mine long before Karen's perfume lingered in its halls. Long before Sam's silence stained its rooms. The brass key sat heavy in my palm. I turned it over slowly, the grooves familiar against my skin. For years it had symbolized belonging. Yesterday, it had symbolized rejection. Today, it was something else entirely. A weapon, I whispered. They thought they shut me out. They never knew I could close the door myself. The hours crawled until the knock came. Firm. Professional. Mr. Davis stood in the doorway, briefcase in hand, suit pressed sharp. His eyes scanned me. Then the papers I held out. You weren't exaggerating, he murmured. Everything is in order. He sat at the table, flipping through page after page, his pen scratching across the margins. His tone was brisk, efficient. The market is strong. With a property like this, we'll have buyers within hours. I nodded once. He slid the final page toward me. The pen lay across the line where my name was printed. For a moment, I hesitated. Images flickered in my mind, Sam's first steps, Christmas mornings, my husband's laugh echoing through the halls. The smell of Sunday dinners. The sound of children's giggles. Then Karen's voice cut through it all. You don't belong here. I picked up the pen, and I signed. The scratch of ink felt like thunder. Not destruction, but release. Mr. Davis smiled, tucking the papers neatly into his briefcase. Congratulations, Mrs. Williams. The house is as good as sold. I leaned back, breath leaving me slow and steady. No fear, no hesitation, just freedom. The storm outside had ended. The sky cracked open with a streak of sunlight, flooding the small kitchen. The brass key glowed faintly where it lay on the table. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a woman waiting to be let in. I felt like the one holding the lock. By late afternoon, the papers were signed. The sale was in motion. The house no longer belonged to them, and soon it would no longer belong to me either. But before I let it go, I knew I had to see it one last time. The street was quiet when I arrived. The maple tree by the curb had already shed half its leaves, bare branches scratching against the gray sky. I stood for a long moment at the gate, the brass key heavy in my coat pocket. I whispered to myself, "One last walk, Maggie. Just one." Uh, when I stepped inside, the air greeted me with silence, a silence different from my apartment. This one was thick, heavy, with the weight of memories pressed into the walls. I walked slowly through the hallway. The carpet still bore the faint stain of grape juice Sam had spilled at 7. My hand brushed the wall where his crayon marks had once been painted over, but not gone. I pressed my palm harder, feeling the grooves. "Still here?" I murmured. "Even if they tried to erase you?" In the living room, I paused. The couch was new, Karen's choice, stiff and pristine. But in my mind, I saw the old floral sofa, sagging in the middle where my husband used to sit. I could almost hear him. "Move over, Maggie. There's room for both of us." I smiled faintly and answered the empty air. "No, there never was. You always took more space than the sofa had." His laugh echoed in my memory, the rustle of newspaper, the clink of his coffee cup. The kitchen smelled of detergent and lemon polish, sterile and sharp. Too clean, too empty. I shook my head. "Not your kitchen anymore, Maggie. Not the one with roast in the oven, bread cooling on the counter, Sam tugging at your apron. Just one slice, Mom. Please," I whispered back. "And you always got two." I moved upstairs. The third step still creaked, stubborn after all these years. At the top of the landing, I turned left into Sam's old room. The posters were gone, the shelves replaced with neat white cabinets. But I still saw him there, sprawled on the floor with his toy cars, humming to himself. "Vroom, vroom," I said softly, mimicking the sound he once made. I touched the window ledge where he used to sit, staring into the yard, eyes full of dreams. "You thought you'd outgrow this house," I whispered. "You did, but not like this." Tears pricked my eyes, but they didn't fall. Not this time. Finally, I went to my room. The bed was stripped, the curtains changed, but the outline of my life was still etched in the space. I sat on the edge of the bed. "Here," I said quietly. "I made promises in the dark. That you, Sam, would always be cared for. That this house would never fail you." The faint hum of the house seemed to answer back. Not cruel, not rejecting, just tired. I rose, walked back down, each step echoing louder than the last. At the door, I pulled out the brass key, turned it in my palm. Heavy, familiar. "This key has opened the door 1,000 times," I said. "Tonight, it will close it once." I slid it into the lock, turned it slowly, and listened to the click. That sound ordinary, yet final. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. The porch creaked under my feet one last time. At the bottom of the steps, I stopped, turned back. "Goodbye," I whispered. The sun broke through the clouds, spilling light across the roof. The house glowed for a moment, golden and solemn, as if it understood. I tightened my grip on the key. "Tomorrow you'll be in another hand, but tonight, you're still mine." And with that, I walked away. The door was locked behind me. Final, I stood on the porch, the brass key still warm in my palm. I whispered, "You've kept me for 40 years. You've held everything. And now, I'm the one letting you go." The wood beneath my feet groaned, almost like an answer. I stepped down the stairs slowly, each creak louder than the last. At the bottom, I turned back. The sun had broken through the clouds, washing the roof in light. For a moment, the house looked alive again, golden and proud. I lifted the key. "You remember me," I said softly, "even if they tried to erase me." The wind stirred. Leaves scattered across the porch. I closed my fist around the key. The grooves cut into my palm. Sharp. Familiar. "This isn't yours anymore," I said to the silent walls. It was never theirs. And soon, it won't be mine either. I walked to the old maple tree at the curb, the one where Sam had once climbed, scraped his knee, cried until I kissed it better. I placed my hand on the bark. "You saw it all, didn't you?" His laughter, my tears, Karen's sharp tongue, their silence. The tree swayed lightly, its bare branches scratching the sky. I pulled the key from my pocket again, turned it over, one last time. "You opened every door for me," I whispered. "But you can't open a heart that's already shut." I crouched and set the key at the roots of the tree. Not tossed, not abandoned, placed. "There," I murmured. "Stay where memories still live, not where cruelty tried to bury them." I stood, brushing dirt from my hands. Behind me, I heard the faint groan of the house in the wind. For a second, it almost felt like goodbye. I turned and spoke to it. Calm and final. "You were mine, you'll never be theirs, and after tonight, you'll be no one's." Silence answered back. I walked away, my footsteps steady on the pavement. At the corner of the street, I stopped once more, looked back. Karen's curtains were drawn, Sam's car gone. The house sat alone, glowing in the last strip of sunlight. I whispered into the empty air, "It's finished." And for the first time in years, I believed it. They came back the next evening. I wasn't there, of course, but Mr. Davis told me later, and I could picture every detail, as if I had been sitting on the porch steps, watching. Karen's car pulled into the driveway first, headlights slicing through the dusk. Sam followed a few minutes later, carrying grocery bags, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. To them, it was just another evening dinner, homework with the kids, television humming in the background. They didn't know the ground beneath them had already shifted. Karen reached for the doorknob with the ease of ownership, but the key jammed. She tried again, twisting harder. Nothing. "Sam," she snapped. "Something's wrong with the lock." He set the bags down and tried his own key. The same dull resistance. Karen's voice rose, sharp with irritation. "Call the locksmith? This is ridiculous." Before he could, a man in a suit stepped out from a car parked across the street. Mr. Davis. He held a clipboard and a calm smile, the kind of expression realtors wear when delivering news that cannot be softened. "Evening," he said. "You must be Sam and Karen. I'm afraid this property is no longer yours to enter. It was sold yesterday. New owners take possession next week." Karen blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Sold? What do you mean, sold?" "That's impossible." Sam's face drained of color. "There must be some mistake. This is our house." Mr. Davis checked his paperwork. "Actually, the deed has always been in Margaret Williams' name. She finalized the sale yesterday. Everything is in order." Karen's voice cracked into a shriek. "She can't do that. She can't just—" "She could," Davis said smoothly. And she did. Sam staggered back against the porch rail, his hand gripping it as though the wood could steady him. The groceries tumbled onto the steps, apples rolling across the pavement. Karen stormed down the steps, her face red with fury. "Where is she? Where is Margaret?" "She's not here," Davis replied. "And even if she were, she doesn't owe you an explanation." Sam buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking not with tears, but with something heavier. Shame. Karen turned on him like a viper. "You said the house was ours. You told me she had no claim anymore." Sam's voice was hollow. I thought she'd signed it over. I never checked." "Oh," Karen's fury sharpened into venom. So you let me fight her? Embarrass her? Push her out? All while she held the deed in her purse? Sam didn't answer. Neighbors had begun to gather across the street, watching the scene unfold. Karen noticed them, her voice dropping into a hiss. Do something, Sam! Get us back in! But he stood frozen, eyes fixed on the locked door. In that moment, he looked less like a man and more like a boy who'd misplaced everything he thought was his. Karen's fists clenched at her sides. She'll pay for this, she spat. I swear she'll regret it. But the truth was already written. Signed in black ink the day before. The house wasn't theirs. It never had been. And for the first time in years, Margaret Williams wasn't the one left standing in the rain. I hadn't planned to see them that evening. But something inside me whispered that I needed to. Not for revenge, not for satisfaction, just for truth. So I walked back down Maple Street as the last light bled from the sky. The brass key cool in my pocket. I saw them from half a block away. Sam sat on the porch steps, head bowed, grocery bags forgotten at his feet. Karen paced back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear, her free hand slicing the air with angry gestures. Neighbors lingered across the street, whispering. When Karen spotted me, her face twisted with fury. There she is, she shouted. The thief herself. Ugh. I stopped at the edge of the driveway, the street lamp buzzing faintly above me. A thief? I said quietly. That's rich. Coming from someone who tried to steal a life she never built. Karen marched toward me, heels striking hard against the pavement. How dare you? You sold this house without even asking us, without thinking about the children. You've ruined everything. I let her words wash over me, calm as stone. Then I drew the envelope from my purse and held it up. This house was never yours to claim. The deed has been in my name since the day my husband signed it. You lived here on my grace, and you mistook my silence for weakness. Her face reddened, her voice dropping to a hiss. You'll regret this. You'll be alone. He won't stand by you after this. I turned to Sam. Won't you? For the first time, he met my eyes. His face was pale, his voice thin. Mom, why didn't you tell me? Because you never asked, I replied. My voice didn't tremble. It rang steady, clear. You let her speak for you until you had nothing left to say. Karen spun on him. Don't listen to her. She's manipulating you, trying to make you feel guilty. Guilty? I cut in sharply. No, Karen. He doesn't need me to make him feel guilty. He already knows what he's done and what he's lost. Silence fell heavy. Even the neighbors seemed to stop breathing. I stepped closer, the envelope still in my hand. Listen carefully. Both of you. That house was my blood, my years, my sacrifice. You thought you could shut me out with cruel words and cold stares, but you forgot the truth. I extended the envelope toward them, then pulled it back. It was never yours. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again, fury choking her words. Sam sank lower on the steps, his hands trembling in his lap. I turned without another word, walking back down the driveway. The murmurs of the neighbors rose behind me, a chorus of judgment neither Karen nor Sam could escape. At the corner, I stopped, pulled the brass key from my pocket, and looked at it one last time. The streetlight glinted off its worn edges. Then I let it fall into the gutter. The metallic clink echoed down the street, sharp and final. I didn't need keys anymore. I held the power now. The next morning, I sat in the realtor's office, finalizing the transfer. The new buyer had already wired the deposit. Everything was done. Clean, irreversible. As I signed the last page, Mr. Davis cleared his throat. Mrs. Williams, I thought you should know something. The bank records show that recently, Someone attempted to begin the process of refinancing this house. Without your authorization. I looked up sharply. Refinancing? In whose name? He slid a paper across the desk. The application bore Karen's signature, her handwriting unmistakable. She listed herself as the primary homeowner, he explained. Claimed her husband would co-sign, but the bank flagged it. Said the title didn't match. They never contacted you? No, I said quietly. My hands tightened around the paper. So this was it. She hadn't been satisfied with pushing me out, with humiliating me on my own porch. She had wanted the house itself. Fully, legally, forever. It wasn't just cruelty. It was theft planned, deliberate. I left the office with the document burning in my purse, heavier than the deed itself. My steps carried me, almost without thought, back toward the house I no longer owned. When I arrived, Sam and Karen were in the yard, arguing in low, furious tones. Karen's face was red, her gestures sharp, while Sam stood stiff, pale, his voice cracking. You told me she had no claim. Karen spat. You swore it was already ours. I thought it was. Sam stammered. I thought she gave it to us years ago. I never checked the paperwork. You fool! Karen hissed. Do you realize what you've cost me? What you've cost yourself? I said, stepping forward. My voice carried, calm, but cutting. They both froze. I pulled the paper from my purse and held it out. Recognize this? Karen's face drained of color. Where did you... You tried to refinance a house you never owned, I said flatly. Forge it into your name. Take what wasn't yours to take. Sam looked from me to her, confusion clouding his features. Karen, is this true? She opened her mouth, then shut it, her silence louder than denial. I stepped closer, eyes fixed on her. You could have chosen family. You could have chosen respect. Instead, you chose greed. Sam's voice shook. You lied to me. You made me believe she didn't matter anymore. Karen finally snapped, her mask cracking. Of course I lied. Do you think we could live our own lives with her hanging over us? That house should have been ours. She should have stepped aside years ago. The neighbors on the sidewalk gasped, whispers spreading like wildfire. Sam's face collapsed in on itself, his shame written plain. I folded the paper and slipped it back into my purse. This is the woman you defended, Sam. The one you let speak for you, while you stayed silent. His eyes glistened, his lips parting as if to speak. But no words came. Karen glared at me with venom, but I saw the panic flickering underneath. She wasn't just angry now, she was exposed, and there's no silence deep enough to cover the sound of truth breaking free. Karen's composure shattered like glass under a hammer. You think this changes anything? She shouted, voice cracking across the yard. So what if the bank refused once? We could have tried again, appealed, fought it. That house should have been ours. Her words carried into the street, where neighbors had already gathered the night before. Curtains twitched, whispers spread, eyes fixed on the spectacle unraveling before them. Sam looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. His face, pale and hollow, tightened with disbelief. Karen, you tried to steal from my own mother? You lied to me. For years. Karen whirled on him, her fury snapping like a whip. I lied? No, Sam. I saved you. You would still be a little boy under her thumb if it weren't for me. I gave you freedom. I gave you a life. Sam's voice cracked. A life built on lies. She laughed bitterly. Oh, don't act like you're innocent. You let me do it. You stood there, silent, while I erased her piece by piece. And why? Because you were too weak to stand up for her. or for yourself. Her words struck him harder than any slap. He staggered back against the porch railing, gripping it like a drowning man clutching driftwood. I stepped closer, my gaze locked on her. Every cruelty, every insult you hurled at me, you thought it was power, but it was desperation. And now everyone can see it. Karen's eyes burned with venom. You think you've won? You'll end up alone, Margaret. Old, bitter, forgotten. This little stunt doesn't change the fact that no one wants you. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The deed was never yours. And the truth is, it never will be. Her mouth twisted into a snarl. She turned back to Sam, jabbing a finger into his chest. Well? Are you going to stand there and let her humiliate us? Or are you going to do something? For once in your life. Sam didn't move. His eyes, my son's eyes, were glassy, filled with something I hadn't seen in years. Shame. Finally, he whispered, She didn't humiliate us, Karen. We did that to ourselves. The yard fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Karen's face contorted, fury and panic warring inside her. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For the first time, she was the one left speechless. I looked at my son, holding his gaze. You let her speak for you so long that you forgot how to speak for yourself. But the truth has a way of finding its voice, even in silence. His lips trembled, but he said nothing. Karen stormed past me, heels striking hard against the pavement. This isn't over, she hissed. Not by a long shot. I didn't follow her with my eyes. I didn't need to. Her threats were as empty as the house she once tried to claim. Instead, I turned to Sam, who still stood frozen on the porch, his shoulders sagging under the weight of everything he had allowed. For the first time, I felt no anger toward him, only a quiet, cutting pity. And pity, I realized, was colder than hate. Karen came back the next day, her fury louder than any storm. I was in the yard, trimming the last of the roses I had planted decades ago, when her car screeched into the driveway. She slammed the door so hard the sound cracked through the quiet street. You think you've won, Margaret? She screamed, striding toward me. You've humiliated me, made me a laughingstock in front of the whole neighborhood. But I'm not going down like this. I set the shears on the bench and stood slowly, meeting her wild eyes. You already went down, Karen. You just haven't realized it yet. Her face twisted, her voice breaking. You took everything from me. No, I said calmly. I simply took back what was mine. She flung her arms wide, gesturing to the house behind us. What about Sam? The children? You've destroyed this family. I felt the sting of her words, but held my ground. I didn't destroy it. You did. Every time you pushed me out, every time you made me invisible. Families are built on love, not on control. Behind her, the porch creaked. Sam stepped out, his shoulders hunched, his face ashen. He looked 10 years older than he had the week before. Karen, stop, he murmured. She spun on him. Stop? You should be furious. She sold our home out from under us. Sam's voice cracked. It was never ours. Karen froze, as if the words themselves had struck her. Don't you dare take her side. I'm not taking sides, he said hoarsely. I'm telling the truth. We lived here because she allowed it, and I let you make me forget that. Her voice rose to a shriek. You're pathetic. Do you know what people are saying? That I married into this family just to steal from her. That I'm a fraud. Her eyes snapped to me, blazing with hate. You wanted this, didn't you? To ruin me. I didn't flinch. I didn't need to ruin you, Karen. You did that yourself. Neighbors had gathered again, their murmurs weaving through the air. Every eye on her, every ear catching her. Every outburst. Karen turned in circles, desperate, her words tumbling out. She's lying. She manipulated all of this. Can't you see? She's. Her voice broke into sobs, then rose again in fury. You'll die alone, Margaret. You'll regret this, when you're nothing but an old woman with no one left. I let her words hang, sharp but empty, before I answered. Better to be alone with the truth than surrounded by lies. Sam buried his face in his hands. Karen screamed, but it was the scream of someone whose power had slipped through her fingers, leaving nothing but echoes. I turned away, my steps steady, leaving her shouts behind me, because in that moment, it was clear. The fight was already over. Karen's screams followed me down the walkway, raw and broken, no longer the voice of a woman in control, but of someone who had lost everything and couldn't accept it. You'll pay for this, Margaret, she howled, her fists clenched at her sides. You'll die old, bitter, and alone. Do you hear me? I paused at the gate, my back to her, the late afternoon sun stretching long shadows across the yard. Slowly, I turned just enough to see her face, red, contorted, wild. You keep saying I'll be alone, I said softly, so only the people close enough could hear. But it's not me standing in a yard full of neighbors, screaming into the wind, the crowd murmured. Karen's face collapsed into rage and panic, her eyes darting to the faces watching from porches and sidewalks. Every whisper cut deeper than my words ever could. Sam sat heavily on the porch steps, his head in his hands. The groceries from the night before still lay scattered across the boards, apples bruised, bread stale. He looked up once, his eyes meeting mine across the distance. There was no defiance there now, only shame. Mom, he whispered, his voice so low I almost missed it. I held his gaze, but I didn't answer. Some silences weigh heavier than words, and this one crushed him more than anything I could have said. Karen turned on him, desperate. Say something. Don't just sit there. Defend me. Oh, but Sam said nothing. His shoulders shook under the weight of years he had let pass in silence. Years in which he'd allowed someone else to take his voice, his choices, his family. Finally, I stepped out through the gate. The crowd parted slightly, eyes following me, some with pity, others with awe. At the edge of the street, I stopped beneath the old maple tree. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single object, the brass key, the same one I had carried since the day my husband first pressed it into my hand. I looked at it for a long moment, feeling the grooves bite into my palm, remembering everything it had meant. Safety, love, sacrifice. Then, slowly, I knelt and laid it at the base of the tree. Not on the porch, not in their hands. At the roots of something older, something that had weathered storms long before any of us. When I straightened, the key glinted faintly in the fading light, half buried in the grass. I turned my back on the house without hesitation. The voices behind me blurred into nothing. Every step I took away from that place felt lighter, steadier, freer. By the time I reached the corner, the house was just another shape against the sky, a shell filled with echoes that no longer belonged to me. And I knew then, with a clarity sharper than any knife, the fight was finished. I hadn't just closed the door. I had locked it forever. The apartment was small, just 2 rooms and a balcony that overlooked a quiet street. Nothing compared to the 4-bedroom house I had poured my life into. But when I turned the key in the lock that first evening, the silence that greeted me was different. Not hostile, not heavy, just mine. I set the boxes down in the corner, the same ones I had carried through rain and humiliation. Their cardboard edges were still warped, but inside, the contents were untouched. My husband's tool belt, Sam's childhood drawings, the quilt made from his baby clothes. I placed them carefully on shelves, not as relics of sorrow, but as proof that I had survived. The first night, I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea. The city hummed softly below, streetlights flickering on one by one. For the first time in years, I felt no need to brace myself for a sharp comment, no fear of being told I didn't belong. The air was still, and it belonged to me. A knock on the door broke the quiet the next afternoon. I opened it to find Emma, my granddaughter, clutching a sketchbook to her chest. "Grandma," she whispered, glancing nervously behind her. "Can I come in?" My heart lurched. "Of course, sweetheart." She stepped inside, her eyes wide as she looked around the modest space. "Mom said we're not supposed to see you. But I miss you." Tears pricked my eyes as I pulled her into a hug. Her small frame trembled against me. "I miss you too, darling. More than you know. More than you know." She pulled back, opening her sketchbook. Inside were drawings our old garden, the roses, the maple tree at the curb. But at the center of every page was me, my face, my hands, my smile, drawn in the bold strokes of a child who remembered what mattered. "I don't care what they say," Emma declared. "You're still my grandma." The words cracked something open inside me, something that had been sealed under layers of hurt. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "And you'll always have me." That evening, she helped me unpack, chattering about school and her little brother, Jake. She insisted we bake cookies in my tiny oven, even though the kitchen barely had room for both of us. The smell of sugar and butter filled the apartment, weaving through the cracks, carrying me back to nights when Sam was her age, stealing cookies before they cooled. For the first time in years, I laughed deep, unrestrained, from a place I thought was gone. When Emma left that night, she hugged me tight, whispering, "I'll come back, Grandma. I promise." And as I watched her disappear down the hall, I realized Karen could command silence. She could manipulate Sam. She could even scream at the world until her voice broke. But she couldn't erase love. Not the kind etched in crayon drawings and the smell of cookies baked in two small kitchens. That love would always find its way back. The visits became more frequent. At first, it was just Emma, slipping away after school with her sketchbook tucked under her arm. Then Jake followed, shy at the door until his sister tugged him inside. "Grandma," he whispered one afternoon, "Mom says you're not really part of the family anymore." But I don't believe her. I knelt and brushed the hair from his forehead. "You don't have to believe everything people say, Jake. Sometimes love tells the truth, louder than words." He smiled then, small and tentative, before throwing his arms around my neck. Soon the apartment, once so quiet, was filled with noise again. Children's laughter, crayons scattering across the floor, the clatter of cookie sheets cooling on the counter. They made the little space feel like a home richer than any mansion. I never asked what excuses they gave Karen. I never asked how they slipped past her rules. Children have a way of finding paths adults can't imagine. And each time they arrived, I saw more cracks forming in the walls of the world Karen had built. One evening, as Emma stirred cookie dough with exaggerated seriousness, she asked, "Grandma, why don't you come back to the big house? It's so empty without you." I set the spoon down and crouched beside her. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, a house isn't a home anymore. And sometimes leaving is the only way to keep your heart safe." She thought about that for a moment, then nodded slowly, as if she understood more than her years allowed. The truth was already seeping into their young minds. Karen's voice could command, but it could not erase what they felt in their bones. Word drifted back through the neighborhood, too. People whispered that Sam and Karen were rarely seen together anymore. That argument spilled out of their windows at night. Karen's voice shrill, Sam's silence, heavier than stone. The children's laughter, once bright in that yard, had vanished, replaced by tension sharp enough to cut the air. One afternoon, as I walked Emma and Jake back to the corner, I saw Sam across the street. He stood alone, hands shoved deep in his pockets, watching us. His shoulders sagged when Emma slipped her hand into mine. For a brief moment, our eyes met. There was no accusation in his, no anger, only regret, deep and unspoken. He opened his mouth as if to call out, but Karen's voice shrieked from the porch, "Sam! Get inside!" And just like that, the moment broke. He turned, trudging back toward the house that no longer belonged to him. I held the children's hands tighter. Walking away, I realized Karen had been right about one thing. I would never live in that house again, but she had been wrong about everything else. I wasn't alone. I had the only pieces that mattered, two small hands in mine, laughter echoing in the hallways of a modest apartment, and love too stubborn to be silenced. That was my revenge. Not loud, not cruel, just undeniable. The apartment had begun to settle around me like a second skin. The walls, once bare, now held Emma's drawings, bright crayon colors of gardens, maple trees, and smiling faces. Jake insisted on taping his paper airplanes to the fridge, each one marked with messy scrawls of, "To Grandma." Every corner carried signs of life, not ghosts of a past I was forced to abandon. In the mornings, I sat on the balcony with my tea, watching the street wake up. People walked their dogs, children rode bikes, buses hissed to a stop at the corner. No porch lights flicked off in rejection, no door locks clicked against me. The quiet here was clean. I thought of the house sometimes, not with longing, but with clarity. It stood there still, heavy with history, its windows staring like blind eyes, but it no longer pulled at me. It was a chapter closed, the pages pressed flat beneath my hand. News drifted in through whispers. Karen's voice could still be heard in the neighborhood, but now it was laced with desperation rather than control. Shouting at Sam, shouting at the children, shouting at shadows. The neighbors grew tired of it, their pity turning to judgment. Sam, I was told, rarely spoke at all. He went about his days hollow, a man who had realized too late the cost of his silence. I didn't celebrate their unraveling. I didn't need to. The satisfaction wasn't in their suffering. It was in my freedom. One afternoon, Emma curled on the couch beside me, sketching quietly. She glanced up. "Grandma, do you ever miss the old house?" I sipped my tea, letting the steam warm my face. "I miss what it used to be," I answered honestly. "But not what it became." She nodded thoughtfully, returning to her sketch. On the page, she drew a small figure sitting under a tree, a house in the distance, and two children running toward the figure. I smiled. "That's beautiful, Emma." She grinned. "That's us. We always find you." The words settled deep. Sweeter than any inheritance. Stronger than any claim on a deed. That night, after the children had gone home, I opened the drawer of my bedside table. Inside lay the old brass key, cleaned of rainwater, but dulled with time. I had picked it up again weeks ago, unable to leave it rusting at the curb. I held it in my hand, heavy and cool. For years it had meant belonging. Then it became a weapon. Now, it was something else entirely. A relic. I set it back into the drawer. Not with sorrow, but with peace. The door it once opened was gone from my life, and I had no desire to walk through it again. The final Sunday of autumn came dressed in gold. Leaves drifted past my balcony, catching the late afternoon light before settling gently on the pavement. I brewed a pot of tea and carried my cup outside, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders. The city was quiet at that hour, a hush between day and evening. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth spread through me. grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. Across the distance, I imagined the old house, its walls now filled with strangers. A different family would eat dinner at the table I once polished. Laughter would echo down the hallway where Sam had taken his first steps. But the thought didn't hurt, it comforted me. Because the house wasn't a tomb anymore. It was alive again, just not mine. And that was fine. My story had already moved on. I glanced at the small table beside me. On it lay Emma's latest sketch, me sitting under the maple tree, her and Jake running into my arms, the house fading in the background like a shadow. Children see truth more clearly than adults. They had drawn what I had lived. As the sun dipped lower, a soft breeze stirred the shawl around my shoulders. The steam from my tea curled upward, carrying the scent of jasmine into the cool evening air. I thought of Karen's voice, sharp, demanding, venomous. I thought of Sam's silence, heavy as stone. And then I thought of myself, standing in the rain with boxes in my arms, humiliated and broken. How far that woman had come. I set the cup down and folded my hands in my lap. My breath came steady, my heartbeat calm. No bitterness lingered, only the clean certainty of closure. On the balcony rail, the last rays of sunlight glinted against a small object I had placed there earlier. The brass key. I had kept it not out of need, but out of choice. It no longer unlocked anything tangible. It had become a symbol, a reminder of both captivity and freedom. I picked it up, turned it once in my palm, and whispered, "Some victories don't need to be loud." Then I laid it gently into a wooden box beside my chair, closed the lid, and let the quiet settle around me. The city lights flickered on one by one. Children's laughter echoed faintly from the street below. Life continued, steady and relentless. I lifted my cup again, letting the steam brush my face, and spoke the final truth aloud. Soft, steady, absolute. Some victories are quiet. This one was perfect. And with that, I sipped the last of my tea as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, leaving me wrapped not in loss, but in peace. The apartment had begun to feel like skin I had always worn but never noticed. At first, it was bare, echoing, too quiet. Now, it breathed with life. Emma's drawings covered the walls, gardens in crayon green, maple trees heavy with red, smiling faces drawn with hands, too small to know proportion, but big enough to know love. Jake's paper airplanes clung to the fridge with tape, each one marked with crooked scrawls. To Grandma. I walked through the rooms and saw no ghosts of the house I had lost. Every corner carried signs of life, not echoes of rejection. In the mornings, I sat on the balcony with tea steaming in my hands. The street woke slowly, dogs tugging leashes, children pedaling bicycles, buses hissing to a stop. No porch light flicked off to signal I wasn't welcome. No locked door waited for me. The quiet here was clean. Sometimes my mind wandered back to the old house, but not with longing, with clarity. It stood there still, a shell heavy with history, its windows staring like blind eyes. It didn't pull at me anymore. The chapter was closed, the pages pressed flat. News traveled, as it always does. Whispers drifted in from neighbors who still lived near that house. Karen's voice, once sharp with authority, was now laced with desperation. She shouted at Sam. She shouted at the children. Sometimes she shouted at nothing at all. Neighbors grew tired of it. Pity soured into judgment. And Sam, poor Sam, he rarely spoke. People said he walked around hollow, carrying the weight of silence that had once been his weapon, but now had turned into his curse. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Their unraveling wasn't my victory. My victory was freedom. One afternoon, Emma curled beside me on the couch, sketchbook in her lap. Her pencil scratched quietly as she drew, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up suddenly. "Grandma, do you ever miss the old house?" Her voice was soft, but it cut straight through. I sipped my tea, letting the warmth spread. "I miss what it used to be," I said, "but not what it became." She nodded, turned back to her sketch. On the page, she drew a small figure under a tree, a house fading in the background, two children running toward the figure. I smiled. "That's beautiful, Emma." She grinned, eyes bright. "That's us. We always find you." Her words sank deep. Stronger than any deed, sweeter than any inheritance. That night, when the children had gone home, I opened the drawer of my bedside table. Inside lay the brass key. I had picked it up weeks ago, unable to leave it rusting in the dirt, cleaned of rain, dulled with time. I held it in my hand. Heavy, cold. For years it had meant belonging. Then it became a weapon. Now, it was only a relic. I whispered to it, "You held my past. You can rest now." I set it back in the drawer. Not with sorrow, with peace. The door it once opened was gone, and I had no desire to walk through it again. The final Sunday of autumn came dressed in gold. Leaves spun down from the maple trees, catching the light before settling softly on the pavement. I brewed a pot of tea, carried my cup outside, and wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. The balcony had become my sanctuary. The street was quiet at that hour, caught between day and evening. A hush that let me hear myself breathe. I sipped slowly. The warmth spread through me, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt in years. Across the distance, in my mind, I saw the old house. I spoke aloud, though no one was there. "You're still standing, aren't you? Watching strangers sit at the table I once polished. Listening to laughter that doesn't belong to you anymore." The wind stirred, carrying the scent of jasmine from my tea. "But you're not a tomb," I whispered. "Not anymore. You're alive again, just not mine, and that's fine." The thought didn't hurt. It comforted me. Emma's sketch lay on the small table beside me. I picked it up again, a small figure beneath the maple tree. Two children running toward her, the house fading like a shadow. Emma had said it best. "That's us. We always find you." I traced the drawing with my finger and smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. You always do." The breeze lifted the edges of the paper. My shawl fluttered. I set the sketch down carefully, afraid it might blow away. I thought of Karen's voice. Sharp, demanding, venomous. "You don't belong here. Say you're sorry. This is our home now." Then Sam's silence. Heavy, unforgivable. I shook my head. "And where are you now, Sam?" "Hollow. Empty. You chose silence, and silence chose you back." I closed my eyes and saw myself again standing in the rain, boxes in my arms, humiliation burning my face. I whispered to that woman, the one who had almost broken, "You made it through. Look at you now." How far she had come. I set the cup down and folded my hands in my lap. My breath steady, my heartbeat calm. On the balcony rail sat the brass key. I had placed it there earlier, watching the light catch its dull edges. I picked it up, turned it once in my palm. "You opened everything for me, and then you locked me out. But now you're nothing more than memory." I held it tighter. Some people think power is in the lock, but it was always in the name. My name. I laughed softly, bitter but calm. Then I laid the key gently into the wooden box beside me. Closed the lid. Firm. Final. "There, rest now." The city lights flickered on one by one. Cars rolled past. Children's laughter floated faintly from the street below. Life continued. Relentless, unmoved. I lifted my cup again. The steam brushed my face, carrying the soft scent of jasmine. I spoke the final truth aloud. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady, absolute. Some victories don't need to be loud. A pause. This one was perfect. I sipped the last of my tea as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, and when the darkness settled around me, I wasn't wrapped in loss. I was wrapped in peace.